I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Rebecca Wood, yes. And together we will be bringing you an unforgettable hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the health and happiness of your pets and your friends and your family and the trees around your house and the fish in the streams near you and basically everybody and everything, because we're all wrapped up together, all us everybody's and everythings, on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we've got a good show for you today. We're going to just chat for a little bit here, and hopefully at some point you'll be joining us anytime at 877-909-1007. Or you may text at 419-973-5841. Either way, we'll get you on the air, get your comments out there. And so we're going to chat for like a little quarter of an hour or so, and then we have an interview. And this interview is about HB 429. And we did an earlier story on HB 429. This is the Energy Jobs with Justice Act. And it's supposed to correct a bunch of the terrible things that House Bill 6 did. You all know about House Bill 6, the bill that was horribly written and pushed through the Ohio State Legislature by First Energy in order to bail out their nuke plants and wipe out Ohio's alternative, clean energy, wind and solar industry. And it was pretty successful at doing that. It really did kind of squash a lot of planned wind and solar projects, but theoretically, this HB 429 is going to turn that around. Then, after that interview, we'll be heard from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca has a segment. And Rebecca, what will you be discussing today? Okay, well, I'll tell you. Rebecca's going to be talking about flamingos. And so we're looking forward to that. And then on to ecological news and information. We got a whole bunch of news stories that we kind of put news on hold last week when we were talking about the winners of the Goldman Prize, but this week news is back and there's a ton of it. So that's our show. We're looking forward to it.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, Rebecca. You're on with
you're back.
And
right.
I just said we're good. And
okay.
I'm assuming that means he's complimenting our radio hosting abilities. Because we are good, in my opinion. We're pretty darn good. So,
but can people hear us? That's the question.
Yes, that is the...
Or are we just entertaining Jeff?
Well, hopefully we're not just entertaining ourselves. And actually the numbers say we are going up. More and more people are downloading the podcast and listening to the show. So Okay, so I am on the road again. And, this is partly why we're not sure what's going on here, because I'm actually in Rome, New York this time. I'm here for my uncle, who was my father's twin. Regular listeners know he passed away earlier this year in Phoenix, and I went to that funeral. But then Rome, New York is where my family is actually based. This is where my great-grandfather came, and he made several attempts, but he eventually got successful in the restaurant business and brought his family over. And so the DeMares started out in Rome, New York. And so this is where the family plot is. And I came out this week because yesterday we had a nice service for his internment. But on the way here, it was quite the drive. It was about 10 hours from Toledo out to Rome, New York. And on the way, of course, since I have the Wonder Van, the plug-in electric hybrid, I was looking for car chargers. And Ohio got a bunch of money from Biden's Build Back Better plan to put electric car chargers in there at the rest stops on the turnpike. And lo and behold, there they are. I saw them this time going out, and my hopes got really, really high because there were a whole bunch of chargers. But I get over there, and it turns out they're none of them the most common charger port, the J1772. So like almost all electric cars now have the J1772, but that is the one kind of charger that is not available at these chargers at the rest stops. And I blame Haraz Ganbari.
Probably, yeah.
My representative, because I specifically told him, I had a meeting with him about HB 434, the bill to turn Ohio into a nuclear waste dump. And in that meeting, he mentioned that he was on the panel putting these chargers in. And I was like, well, be sure to get some J1772s because that's the most, most electric cars use that, even though there's a whole bunch of different kinds. And he didn't. And they didn't. And so predictably, all the charge ports were empty because very few cars use the sort of charge ports that they have. So for the average person who's trying to decide, should I get a electric car or should I not, or what are other people doing? And they're looking like at the chargers to say, are people using those? And they're empty because they have the wrong kind of chargers on them. That's like the best world for the best possible non-endorsement if you're in favor of like continuing to burn fossil fuels and to avoid getting us off carbon. That's what you want. You want a ton of empty chargers, and that's what Ohio has. But I'm telling you now, that's the reason. The reason is because those chargers are all the wrong kind. Because I would have plugged in there, man. I would have charged right up. But
Ohio.
Yeah, another Ohio. So trip was all right. It was good. It was nice weather like we're having here. But I did notice this year that we've reported before about how there's an invasive species called Phragmites from Europe that is displacing cattail marshes. And along this route, there's a whole bunch of places where that has been happening over the years. And I've just kind of watched it and sort of cheered the cattails on because it was like, it's a very clear line. When Phragmites takes someplace over, it very clearly is like, here's the Phragmites, there's the cattails. And I've been sort of watching over the years as it sort of crept along. This year, the Phragmites have won. Pretty much everywhere on this trip here that I'm taking, or that I took, which is 80 to 90, all the way to Rome, New York. It's all Phragmites, so that's kind of sad. But there are some nice things going on around here. This is a very rural, very beautiful area. And yesterday I took a walk along the Erie Canal because the Erie Canal goes right through Rome, New York. And it got me to thinking, it reminded me that I wanted to talk a little bit about, we've talked about how trains are the most efficient way of moving goods, right? They're much more efficient than trucks or and many, many times more efficient than moving stuff by air. But I I've completely forgotten that the most efficient form of moving goods is actually canal. In fact, if you have barges, if you're moving stuff by barges, it's different for dry goods versus wet goods, because wet goods, basically they slosh around more. They've got they've got a lot more inertia. I once knew a truck driver, and I asked him what the hardest thing to haul is, and he said cream. Because cream just sort of sloshes around in there. You've always got to be like either accelerating or applying your brakes, because it wants to move the truck around. So anyway, if you're moving dry stuff, barges are 16 times more efficient than trains and 70 times more efficient than trucks in terms of energy usage and the amount of carbon you have to put in the air to do the moving. And if you're moving wet stuff like fuel or milk or cream, then barges are 50 times more efficient than trains and 150 times more efficient than trucks. And, barges are still used to transport a lot of stuff. So it's not like the barge has disappeared from the world, but we've moved away from barge travel, and I think we need to move back to it. And there's a lot of reasons to do it, not just the environmental, but one thing that's going on with this whole shortage of baby formula is that we've switched over to something called the just-in-time delivery model, which is that none of these stores, no retailers, keep warehouses full of supplies anymore. Because if you have inventory, if you've got stuff sitting waiting to be sold that's worth money, you have to pay taxes on that, for one thing. And for another, tastes change so quickly that people have a warehouse full of stuff, and then all of a sudden people don't want that anymore, and now they've lost a ton of money because they bought the wrong thing. But there's some things, some essentials like baby formula, you can predict pretty well ahead of time how much you're going to need, and you don't need it delivered like tomorrow, which is what you do when you get something by truck or train or plane. If you know you're going to need it and you've got some lead time, if you were able to have it delivered to you by barge, you would literally, like I just said, you would use a tiny fraction of the energy. You put a tiny fraction of the carbon in the air, and actually, it's practical to use very low power things like mules to move barges. So they're sort of ideal for switching to solar power because they've got a lot of surface area. They don't have to move very fast. And if you had covered barges with solar panels, we could be delivering most of what we needed without putting any carbon in the air. So just a reminder here that barges are maybe the once and future technology for the way we're supposed to move a lot of things. So, all right. Well, now I think we're ready to go on to our interview. All right, let's go to our interview on HB 429. Thanks so much for coming on. Let's go ahead and get some introductions.
Yeah, good morning, Joe. My name is Nolan Rutschling. I'm the Managing Director of Energy Policy for the Ohio Environmental Council and the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund.
Good morning, Joe. My name is Samia Bray, and I serve as the co-director of the Black Environmental Leaders Association alongside David Wilson, and in honor of the legacy of Jacqueline Gillen.
Well, thanks so much for agreeing to be interviewed. Could someone just give me like a quick overview of the Energy Jobs with Justice Act?
Sure, Joe, be happy to do that. So the Energy Jobs and Justice Act is a comprehensive clean energy policy that is rooted in three things: equity, economic development, and accountability. What it looks into is, after decades of energy policy that has largely favored utilities and fossil fuels, Ohio really is in need of a forward-looking solution that is good for our economy, benefits all of our communities across Ohio, and for our health. So the Energy Jobs and Justice Act ensures that Ohio emerges from with an energy policy that is designed to benefit all Ohioans in three primary areas, one being equity, the other one being carbon reduction, and then the last being accountability and transparency. So that's a high-level overview, and happy to talk more during the interview about any of those details.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a big bill. It's 265 pages. There's a lot to unpack, but I noticed that the first section, anyway, is all about being able to acquire property. Is it anticipated there's going to be a lot of building of new infrastructure, new buildings as part of this plan?
Yeah, Joe, that's a great question. There's not a focus on acquiring property in this legislation. What you're seeing reflected in the bill language is some changes made to existing law that focus on state property and eminent domain and issues like that. This legislation includes that language because it makes some changes to the definition of what we call energy waste reduction, otherwise known as energy efficiency. So there are some components in that section of the Ohio Revised Code that touch on acquiring property. This bill does not focus on or expand any property acquiring of property or eminent domain or anything like this. It just so happens that a few small changes are being made to portions of legislation that does mention that.
I see. Okay. Well, there is a lot that specifically helps out BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color owned businesses. How will this bill help those businesses, and how important is it to mix social justice issues in with environmental legislation?
Yeah, Joe, I can speak to that. So from an environmental justice perspective, what we're looking at is both communities that are BIPOC and also just transition communities. We're talking about communities that maybe the community was built around a coal plant or a business that has left that community, and now we have residents who for generations had relied upon that as an income source, both directly working there and those associated businesses that grew as a result of that large business being there. So this really looks at providing support within the BIPOC community, that's the Black, Indigenous, people of color community, as well as those who have been impacted negatively by industry leaving their communities.
It looks like it's trying to create a lot of businesses or support businesses, BIPOC businesses specifically, that'll do things like help with energy efficiency and helping houses get insulated and things of that nature.
Yeah, and that's in part because when we look at the industry as it stands right now, because of legacy decisions and different ways that business has been done up until this point, there's an equity investment needed to get a more level playing field. And so this legislation entertains some of those interventions that are needed for those, if you will, for example, if the communities that are being focused on have received less investment for many years. And so this looks at, again, beginning to level that playing field of the disinvestment and the disproportionate impact that has happened simultaneously within communities across Ohio.
Okay. Now, this bill creates something called the Office of Energy Justice that's supposed to reverse the historical trend of putting harmful industries disproportionately in areas where minorities live. How much power would this office have? Could they actually stop a proposed project that would clearly hurt BIPOC communities?
So I'll start with that, and Nolan, please feel free to chime in if you'd like. At this point, the legislation is still under consideration, and so what we know about legislation is things can sometimes change inside of as it moves forward. However, the intent and the hope is that, yes, this department would in fact have a level of power that would be able to at least let it not just go forward without any type of pushback if that was the case, and to be able to provide some advocacy in that regard.
Okay. Now, the goals for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in this bill are very ambitious. 25% by 2025, that's just 3 years from now, 50% by 2030, and 100% by 2050. And this is great. These are the kind of aggressive goals we need to survive. And the bill puts the responsibility for reaching these targets on the Director of Environmental Protection. What kinds of things will the EPA Director be able to do to help Ohio reach those targets?
Yes, thanks, Joe. The Ohio EPA Director under this legislation is empowered and is actually required to create rules to achieve the greenhouse gas emissions you mentioned, the reduction goals you mentioned. Number of tools they have to be able to do that. They're able to create carbon reduction plans and direct resources for greenhouse gas emissions tracking and reduction strategies. So they're able to convene stakeholders across the community, particularly, as Samia has touched on, members of communities of color, disadvantaged communities, and those who are part of energy transition. To be able to take that community engagement, they are able to take that community engagement, create carbon reduction plans, and then direct resources to ensuring they're tracking and properly accounting statewide greenhouse gas emissions. The director is able to employ demand-side management and renewable energy development strategies and regulatory strategies that have been deployed by other jurisdictions to reduce these emissions. So the EPA director would be empowered to work with the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio and other state regulatory bodies to ensure all sectors of our economy would be included in the carbon reduction goals. And then the EPA director is also required to report to the legislature, I believe, every 2 years on the greenhouse gas emission goals. So there's quite a lot of accountability and tools in the toolkit for the director to use.
Okay, well, one of the ways this bill is being promoted is as restoring some of the pro-environment policies that were actually gutted by HB 6. Which of these policies does it kind of reinstate or revisit?
Sure, and it is important to note that this is a comprehensive energy legislation. It does focus on some of the harms done by House Bill 6, but it also has many other components that move well beyond just addressing that. But in terms of House Bill 6, the Energy Jobs and Justice Act reinstates greenhouse gas emissions goals for electric distribution utilities. So previously, the electric distribution utilities had a renewable portfolio standard that required them to have a certain percentage of their generation mix come from renewable energy sources. This does reinstate those goals at a more aggressive level than previously. This legislation also reestablishes some form of energy waste reduction programs that are similar, although slightly adjusted, but similar to the former energy efficiency resource standard that House Bill 6 eliminated. So it would reinstate energy efficiency or energy waste reduction programs that utilities can offer to help folks save money on their bills and implement energy efficiency measures.
Now, unfortunately, the sponsor of this bill, Casey Weinstein, is also a co-sponsor of a bill called HB 434, and that bill would essentially, we've reported on it on this show before, it would essentially turn Ohio into a nuclear waste dump by creating a nuclear authority that would take nuclear wastes and do whatever it wanted with them, basically. Does this bill, Energy Jobs and Justice Act, does that give any favoritism to nuclear power?
This bill touches on many components of the energy sector. The only mention of nuclear power in this bill is part of the carbon reduction plan efforts, and in fact really just are focused on increasing transparency and accountability for owners and operators of fossil fuel generating plants and nuclear plants. So in this bill, nuclear plant operators are required to justify the carbon reduction benefits of their plants, present an equitable plan for nuclear waste disposal, and to have a plan for a just transition after the plants close. So there's not financial incentives going to the nuclear plants in particular or anything like that. It does just increase accountability and transparency. The Energy Jobs and Justice Act also requires the reports and findings of independent audits, whether it's economic, operational audits, financial audits of all existing fossil fuel and nuclear generation facilities that the owner and operator may use to justify the inclusion of these plants in a carbon reduction plan. So essentially, Energy Jobs and Justice requires that if a nuclear owner and operator wants to include their generation source as part of a carbon reduction plan that's required, there's a lot of transparency, accountability, and considerations for them to do so. So I also, as I mentioned, the bill also touches on nuclear a little bit when we're talking about directing resources to economically disadvantaged communities. So the bill requires a plan on a just transition as maybe nuclear power plants are decommissioned and shut down. The bill requires the owners and operators to create a plan and offer up some level of funding and resource for that just transition.
Okay, well, we could certainly use more transparency with the nuclear industry. That's pretty much a black hole right now. So where is this bill in the legislative process, and what are the chances of it coming out of committee?
This bill has had one hearing in the House Public Utilities Committee. Co-lead sponsors Representative Juanita Brent and Representative Casey Weinstein gave testimony on this piece of legislation in committee earlier this year in May. After that, the next step would be for some more committee hearings to be held, allow proponents, opponents, interested parties to participate in the committee process. In terms of chances for coming out of committee, as we've said, this is a comprehensive piece of energy legislation. We know there's a lot of desire for a comprehensive piece of energy legislation, as we've heard from our state elected officials over the last few years. We think there's a lot of components in this bill that are attractive to members of both sides of the aisle. The equity components, the job components, and the transparency and accountability components of this legislation are things we think everyone should care about because they impact all aspects of this community. So we OEC and our partners Bell and many other folks across the state are excited to continue the conversation with legislators and do everything we can to move it out of committee and then out of the House. Whether it's this summer, this fall, or further down the line, this is a comprehensive piece of legislation we're all very committed to working on and seeing succeed.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, go ahead.
I was going to say, well said. You know, as Bill is committed as well to that regard, as well as Nolan said, is other partners.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into all the details of the 265 pages. Are there any aspects of the bill that we haven't discussed yet that people really should know about?
Just that it moves Ohio towards a more equitable clean energy future by encouraging clean energy growth, energy waste reduction, and it curbs utility influence over policymakers and regulatory action. One thing I think we all can appreciate is that, you know, that which gets measured gets done. And so this legislation, as Nolan has said, is comprehensive, and it adds a little bit more, well, a lot of bit more accountability and transparency to that end.
Now, if my listeners wanted to help advance the bill, what should they do?
Sure. So they could go to energyjobsandjustice.org. And on that page, there are several ways that they could get involved at their level of comfort. One is if they're just interested in information, they can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. If they are interested in joining and getting information on a regular basis, they can join our mailing list so that any type of information, updates, etc., they would automatically get that in their inbox. And then the last way, which is that of taking action, if they're saying, yes, this is something I would like to be really engaged in a more substantive way, they can click the Take Action button and participate in that regard.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you, folks, for listening. And I want to say that we, in the first part of the show, we got not one, not two, but 3 texts from listeners. Thanks so much. One listener said, our newspaper ran a small story yesterday claiming CO2 levels averaged 421 parts per million in the month of May. And yeah, that's a story we're going to have more detail on next week, but it does look like the levels of CO2 are going up at this time of the year when historically they should actually be going down because the leaves have come out on the foliage in the northern hemisphere. So we're supposed to be dropping, but it looks like we're getting some record levels. We'll talk more about that next week. Next, we had a nice long text from a listener who their question is they're looking to put a new HVAC system into the home, but finding few options besides natural gas. And they wanted to know what kind of heating I have in my home. And so the best heating and cooling system for a house right now in terms of carbon is geothermal. Hands down. If you can put a geothermal system in and solar panels, you can make your house actually carbon negative because you'll be putting more energy on the grid, more solar energy than you're going to need to heat and cool your house. I don't have geothermal yet. It is one of my goals, and working towards that. One of the things I have to do first is improve the insulation in my home because my home was built in the late 1920s, and so I have to insulate a little better before I can switch to the geothermal. But that's my recommendation. And there's a bunch of different manufacturers, and the efficiency of the geothermal system can vary a lot. So you have to do some homework to make sure you get a system that is big enough to power and cool your whole home. But that's the best. And cooling is actually where geothermal really kicks butt because you're taking the coolness out of the ground around your home. And so that there's tons of coolness there, just a few inches down. It's always 55 degrees. So you can cool a huge space with almost no energy. So thank you for that one. And then our third text was from a listener who, let's see, what he calls us nerds. Rebecca, both you and me, I guess, since it's plural.
Shocked I am by these allegations.
Well, yes, and he used 9 exclamation points, which, if you're going to be a nerd.
Oh my God, it's a nerd times 9. It's exponential.
Nerd to the 9. And he also called us, he said, bush leaguers. Called us bush leaguers. So,
okay.
So, thanks for all those texts. I appreciate it.
He's implied that we're not wealthy and famous, I guess. Oh, well.
Yeah, no, nobody's offered me any kind of contracts, not like...
I had already noticed that.
But, it's kind of like Johnny Depp in that first movie where he got called you said, you're the worst pirate I ever heard of. And he could say, well, but you have heard of me. So, appreciate this guy took the time to insult us. So,
there we go.
Great. All right. But somebody who doesn't insult us, someone who appreciates us despite our nerdiness. I'm not going to try to deny the nerd thing. It's just,
Yeah, I think there's no point really for either one of us. Yeah.
No, it's just that's something you embrace. So, and we also embrace our advertisers and patrons. For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging program, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There's several ways you can get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897 during regular business hours. You can also go to their website, which is wcparks.org. And they also have a nifty app. Go to any app store and download it. Search for WC Parks. And, of course, they're on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, etc., etc., etc. That's the Wood County Park District. And For a Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons. And patrons are wonderful people who love nature, love the planet, and want that green future that so many of us, want and need. And they realize that in order to do that, you have to be willing to put in a little bit of your own resources to protect resources in the future for everybody. And so they went to patreon.com, Patreon. They searched for a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page, and they picked a level of membership that matched their monthly budget. And every month a little bit comes out of their account, comes over to us. And that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air. So thank you so much to our patrons. All right, Rebecca, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's hear about flamingos.
Alrighty, so if you're anywhere in Northwest Ohio, this weekend is the first Old West End Festival, I believe, in 3 years because of COVID. And people are really excited about that. And the official emblem of the Old West End and the Old West End Festival is, of course, those little yard flamingos that they're usually plastic, I guess. But I thought I would do actual flamingos. So the flamingo is a wading bird. It's in the family Phaenicopteridae. It's split among... I've seen the figure either 2 or 3 genres, so I'm not sure. But it's... 4 species split among 2 or 3 genres in this family.
You mean genuses?
Yeah.
2 or 3 genuses.
Genuses, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Except for somebody else said, oh no, it's actually 4 species native to the Americas and 2 native to Afro-Eurasia.
Ah.
So it's kind of all over the place. It mostly sticks to the coasts, although I think it's in the high Andes also. I don't know. I guess there are lakes up there. I don't know. I thought they liked water, but anyway. Maybe they're just saying that it's in countries like Chile and Argentina that are in the Andean region, but it sounded like they were saying they actually have them in the mountains. I'm not sure. Anyway, their name means flame-colored. It's kind of based on the Provençal, the dialect of French word for flame. Flamme, I think it is, and then ing is a German suffix, so it's the sort of the flaming, I don't know, Provençal German bird. So yeah, there's the interesting thing about flamingos. Really, one of the most interesting things is that there's a big scientific argument that's been going on for a long time about what other birds they're more closely related to. First people naturally thought it was spoonbills and ibises because they seem a lot like them. They're wading birds, you just look at them and think, yeah, spoonbill or ibis is probably related to that. But then somebody thought for a while they were related to what was it? Ducks and geese, because they have parasites which are only also found in ducks and geese. I think they're feather lice. So there was that, and then there's a fair amount of morphological and molecular evidence that they're closely related to grebes, which are little water birds, which I don't know, do they even have very much of a neck? I don't think they do. But okay, the argument that's winning right now, apparently, that has the most credibility, I think, in the scientific community is that they are actually related to doves and sand grouse. So they're kind of this weird kind of dove that started wading in the water and evolved to be really different from the other doves. I think they're called like the clade they're in is called the miracle birds because they look so different from all the other species that they're related to. So, odd bird. So yeah, if you want to see any in this hemisphere, you pretty much want to go to Chile, the Andes, and the Caribbean. Why do they stand around on one leg? Well, that's a big mystery also. Apparently, there are some theories. Greater stability, uses less energy in that position, conserves heat possibly, except they also do it in warm water, so no one knows. They're very good flyers. You gotta clip their wings if you want to keep them in a zoo. A Kansas zoo didn't get around to it fast enough, and now there's a couple of African flamingos living in Texas. Bird watchers have spotted them, so they got a ways that way. The pink is from bacteria and beta-carotene that they get from their diet of algae, I believe. Did I write that down? I don't know.
Shrimp?
But I said mostly algae, but yeah, that could be too. But yeah, so it's an indication of a healthy flamingo if it's pink or dark red, and it makes it a more desirable mate to other flamingos. If you see a white flamingo, it's probably malnourished and also sick. They run from, depending on species, between 2.6 to 4.7 feet tall. They can open their mouths by raising their upper beak or lowering their lower jaw. So they almost kind of do have a flip-top head, apparently. They have an arcuate bill, which is made for bottom scooping, and they use their feet to also stir up the mud, so, things come up. Oh, they eat plankton. It says here they eat plankton. Maybe they eat shrimp, too. It seems to me I've heard that they also eat shrimp. I don't know. But, yeah, on a personal note, I wanted to finish by adding a major discovery which I have made about flamingos, which all the scientists seem to have missed from my observations at the Toledo Zoo. Flamingos cannot look macho, no matter how aggressively they are behaving. I've seen this. I saw it was feeding time, and one flamingo was actually had its whole bill around another flamingo's long, skinny neck, and it looked terrifying and yet somehow also silly, very silly. It didn't look tough, or I don't know. I guess it was scary without actually, I don't know. Yeah, maybe that adds extra horror to the fact that this ridiculous looking creature is trying to kill you. I don't know, but yeah, maybe they look macho to each other. I hope.
Okay,
poor things,
right. But not the white ones. The white ones are can't get a date. Yeah. So
weak and sickly they are.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Nice. All right, on to ecological news, and we got a ton of it. First story, Washington Post, May 24th. ExxonMobil loses bid to nix climate change lawsuit. Turns out that the Attorney General of Massachusetts, a gal by the name of Maura Healey, in 2019, she filed a suit against ExxonMobil basically saying, hey, you spent millions of dollars misleading people about climate change. You knew it was happening, and you did this massive PR campaign to make people doubt it, and you also were claiming to be doing something about it at the same time when you absolutely were not. And so she took him to court and sued him, and and Exxon tried to say she can't do that to us. And the judge at the Supreme Court, this is the highest level in the Maine state court system, said, yes, she can. So that suit is going on, and poor Exxon may end up having to pay billions of dollars to people. Next story. We've covered before the controversy about putting fracking fluids on roads to melt ice or prevent dust on dirt roads. And so the University of Pennsylvania did a study. Turns out that the brine, the oil from fracking, is literally no better at controlling dust than rainwater. So, in other words, not only is it contaminated with all kinds of nasty stuff, it doesn't do the thing that municipalities are paying out millions of dollars for this fracking water so they can put it on their dirt roads. It's not doing anything more than if you just put rainwater on it. And some of the nasty stuff that's in there, we've talked before about how there's a radium in there, which is radioactive and builds up in the soil around. It turns out it's also full of chlorides, which are nasty for the environment. Chlorine, when it gets into the water, mixes with all kinds of stuff chemically and creates even nastier chemicals. And it's got lots of sodium in it, which turns out one of the things putting sodium on your roads does is actually dissolves your roads. So these municipalities, they're paying bucks to the fracking companies to buy their wastewater to put on their dirt roads, are actually paying to put something on the roads that are destroying the roads. So kind of, hopefully this will...
Wow.
Yeah. Hopefully this will take the... Oh, what do we got there, Rebecca? Okay. I heard some background noise for a second there. So hopefully this will take the wind out of that industry sales, the fact that, it doesn't do anything and you're paying good money for something that doesn't do anything. Now.
Technically it does something bad, Joe.
Oh, that's right. It doesn't do anything good, right? It does bad stuff, but it doesn't do the thing you're paying the money to have it do. So, yeah. All right. Off to Rhode Island now, where about 7 years ago, the first big offshore wind farm was put into the ocean by the United States. That was 7 years ago, excuse me. And at the time, there were a lot of people who were like, no, it'll hurt the fish. It'll have all kinds of horrible environmental effects. Well, there's been a 7-year study which was just published in the Journal of Marine Science on March 29th, 2022. And that's the official journal of the International Council for the Exploration of the Seas. And this study was done by Oxford University. Turns out that the turbines not only don't hurt fishing, they actually improve fishing. And so what's happening is there's a lot of invertebrates, things like mussels, that are growing on the base of these turbines, and that's actually increasing the number of cod and sea bass. And so all these people that are trying to fight wind turbine offshore wind on the basis of it hurting fish and hurting the ecosystems are wrong. And we should have known this because Europe has had offshore wind for decades now, and that's what their studies have shown. So this is not a surprise. But B, Maine last year actually banned offshore wind because they said it was going to hurt fishing. And so the entire ban is based on a false premise. And so maybe Maine will come to their senses and reverse that ban now. So because once again, we talk about this on our promo. Once again, we are interested in finding out the truth about these things. And so when you've done a big study and you've discovered, hey, wind turbines actually help fishing, then stop trying to block them on the idea that they hurt fishing, because literally they do not. Okay, now off to the entire planet, because today turns out is World Environment Day. And apparently this has been around since 1973. And I have to admit, I have never heard of World Environment. I don't remember World Environment Day. Rebecca, have you ever heard of World Environment Day before?
I have not. I'm guessing it's something that somebody sort of came up with, like, right before the same time as Earth Day, but then Earth Day got more popular or something. Sounds like it.
Yeah, well...
For starters, Earth Day has a shorter and snappier name, which is always a plus.
That's true. Earth Day is more marketable because you don't have to worry. It's the Earth. Of course you celebrate that. But the environment, and some people start going, I don't celebrate the environment, even though technically you were talking about the same thing. But, about 50 years ago, this is a sort of a UN-based thing. The UN had a big conference in Stockholm on the environment, and this World Environment Day was started the next year. It sort of grew out of that, and so it seems like this is sort of an internationally based holiday and a sort of a UN-based holiday. And the head of the UN makes a statement every year on World Environment Day, and this year is no exception. The head, Antonio Guterres, was talking about the planet being, this is our only home, which is true. And the fact that we're not taking care of it, we're not doing enough. Now, some people like Musk there says that the Earth is our only home. So his immediate response is, well, then let's get another home. And he wants to bring us over to Mars. But when there's people who have, let's say, hoarding as a psychological problem, my experience is when a hoarder, like with somebody who doesn't have their relationship to the stuff around them quite right, when they fill one house, if you get them another home, they just fill the second home too, because you haven't.
No more homes until you take care of the one you got. That should be a rule.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need to learn to operate in a balanced way on this planet, and then we'll be ready. Like when you've got your toddler, once you don't really want to take them to the restaurant when they're throwing spaghetti around as far as they can. You want to get them to the point where they can sit and eat, and then you can take them out.
They got to get good with the chicken nuggets first.
Exactly. So, but happy World Environment Day, everybody. So now we're going off to Ukraine, and this is a breaking story. This is just a story that came out a few hours ago. Russia has begun sending missiles into Kiev again, or Kyiv, and some of those missiles passed critically close to, like right over the top of one of the nukes in Ukraine, the South Ukraine nuclear plant, which is about 220 miles south of Kyiv, second largest nuke in the country, but plenty big to contaminate all of Europe if it got hit by a missile. And so things are heating up there, unfortunately. And, I've said it before, that any country that has a nuclear plant in their country has given their enemies a nuclear weapon, because all these plants are at risk. As long as there's bombs flying around, there's a risk of this catastrophe. And nuclear catastrophes don't just hurt the country where they happen. They hurt everybody on the ecosystem, and everybody in the planet, everybody in the whole world environment. So, all right, one last story, and kind of an upbeat story. Right after Fukushima, 1,200 people in Japan, in the province of Hokkaido, filed a court thing saying, hey, our nuke plants are just like the ones over there in Fukushima. They're on the ocean. They're subject to tsunami. Let's shut them down. And so that's been in the courts since then. And what happened this past week, there was a ruling, and the TEPCO, or the Japanese government wants to restart all their nuke plants because they're crazy that way. But the judge said they cannot restart the Hokkaido nuke plants because the seawall they've got, just like the one at Fukushima, is too short. And there's also the assertion that it's built on a bad foundation. It's built on ground that will liquefy in the case of case of an earthquake, and the seawall will actually sink into the ground. And so when the tsunami comes, it won't be there. The judge did not rule that they have to be decommissioned, but he did rule you can't restart them until you've actually come up with a practical plan to keep Fukushima from happening again. So that's some good news from Japan. All right. Wow, that's it for our show. Not bad for a couple of nerds.
Indeed.
All right. Well, this is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off. I don't want them nukes run by them cool more three-headed frogs, or kids with leukemia.